Okay, we're rolling.
Kia ora tātou. My name is Graham Hingangaroa Smith, and I'm at the moment the Distinguished Professor of Education, but also the Director of the Post-Treaty Settlement Futures Institute at Te Whare Wānanga o Awanuiarangi. And my background has been in education and economic development. I'm also interested in language revitalisation and the position of our cultural ways of being and knowing. Recently my work has been more international. I've been engaged in developing relationships with other communities who are building more confidence with their Indigenous knowledge programs and projects as they seek to find their way in a world that seems to be closing in on us. And so today I want to talk about the R.E.K.A project as a distinctly Ngāti Awa project that's emerged out of our community here. It's important to recognise that component, that this initiative is a self-development initiative. I just want to reflect a little bit on that idea of self-development, because in the current climate I would say that most communities now, both in New Zealand and internationally, have a significant critique of development that is applied externally over the top of our communities. It would be fair to say, as a generalisation, that we have been less than successful in getting the traction that we need to make the change and the advances that our peoples require. And so the significant change that's occurred to me is a greater movement amongst Indigenous communities towards this idea of self-development. The coming off the belief that the answers to our futures lies within ourselves. Coming off the belief that we need to do things first, have a strong belief in what we're doing, and trust that the rest of the world will catch up with what it is that we're about. And so across New Zealand, we've learned off our early struggles related to language revitalisation. So many of the elements that we're talking about here are those elements that have come out of and emerged from our language struggle in New Zealand, from Te Kohanga Reo, Kura Kaupapa Maori, and the alternative education struggle. Many of those initiatives were very much about Maori people getting up and making the difference themselves, taking action for ourselves, being self-developing about what it is that we consider to be important, and not waiting for others to come along and give us a hand up or do it for us. I think we all agree that we need help along the way, but unless we make the start and take the first steps for ourselves, it often doesn't happen. And so this particular project that I've been lucky enough to observe emerge out of our community here in Whakatane, in the Bay of Plenty, in the Mātātua Rohe, has been significant. It's been significant, I believe, in speaking about these kinds of new ideas around self-development for Maori and Indigenous communities. A key thing here is, in our current context in New Zealand, is the emerging Maori economy, and in the post-treaty settlement phase we're seeing significant numbers of iwi now coming into streams of money and income, and the desire to move more broadly into the development, economic development of their iwi and hapu and wider communities. So one of the issues that has arisen out of a recent project that we did, which was a survey of 4 iwi, was to discover that often there was a tension between the wealth creation arm of the iwi and the social, cultural, economic development desire of the runanga involved. And this tension often led to a great deal of dissatisfaction amongst the iwi, individual iwi members across the tribal context. To the point then, the idea of looking at a project like R.E.K.A is that it provides an opportunity, I believe, for individual hapu and tribal members to participate in forming some control over their own lives, taking a greater intervention into some of the haki or those things that are debilitating around and undermining their lifestyle and their life chances. So how does this work? Well, one of the elements that's important here is, as I've remarked, is the self-development, that people are doing this for themselves. Secondly, it doesn't take too much of a resource or too much external money for individuals and families to get involved in growing their own food. The simple act of growing food for yourself is a self-development act. It's a resistance, in my view, against being marginalised in the social, economic and cultural sense. And it's a great stepping stone for rebuilding some of those elements that are powerful agents in making the difference in our lives. So some of the things that are important here in the revitalisation of our traditional elements are things like whanaungatanga, the importance of our whānau. At a time, of course, when many of us are under pressure, it's very hard to find whānau that are acting in the ways in which we may have been expected to act in the more traditional settings. We've been overtaken by the notion of individualism, of being very privatised in our activities, of wrapping our arms around our own property, of putting our own kai in our own fridge, of centering ourselves at the centre of the world, and losing sight of our traditional values of collectivity, of being responsible for each other, of reciprocity, of sharing our resources for the benefit of all. And within the R.E.K.A project, we see the re-emergence and the development of a context which allows for this re-emergence of these traditional values and practices. Now, contained within our ability to work collectively and to work strongly and to work in ways which share our resources is what I have called elsewhere a residual social capital. And it enables us to mobilise that social capital to intervene in circumstances where many of our families are living in very debilitating social and economic circumstances. They're able to at least enact for themselves some form of resistance, some form of intervention by firstly growing their own food and secondly by mobilising these traditional values of collectivity. I should also say that one of the concepts that's reinforced by R.E.K.A is what I call a 360 intervention, and that we need to move beyond just doing, when we're thinking about Māori development, of just doing singular projects. This project here, we're going to develop our early childhood education. So we put all of our resources in there, all of our focus goes there. So while we're busy focusing on one small area over here, the water is coming through the holes in the dam everywhere else. And so our response to multiple forms of colonisation, multiple forms of underdevelopment also need to be multiple. We need multiple resistances, often being enacted simultaneously. And so we need to not just do one thing as a resistance, but we need to do many things. So the R.E.K.A project is a project enables us to do a 360 intervention, because it's not just about putting food in our stomachs and putting food on our table to feed our mokopuna, which is an absolutely basic life skill and need, but it's also about eating healthy food. It's a health intervention. It's also potentially about building small economic responsiveness through the idea of developing food cooperatives. It's also about potentially building small export opportunities. It's also about our language, knowledge and culture as we resurrect some of our traditional ways of working collectively, of sharing the burden of the workload. It's also about the enactment of our traditional values of reciprocity and so on, looking after our kaumātua and our elders, of refinding many of those traditional customs that have been lost, that have been overtaken by the hurly-burly of the new pressures of the modern and contemporary world, where we go to hui now and the locals sit down before the manuhiri, where people push in front of our kaumātua to get to the table, where our young ones are neglected, at some of these hui and not fed properly or appropriately or in time. So a lot of these things which in our more traditional sense were collective and more whānau oriented values have been overtaken, and we need to I think get back to them. Well, the R.E.K.A project as part of its 360 intervention is engaging in many of these things, of revitalising our traditional values and customs as it pertains to food. So putting food in our stomachs and the need to live is one element, and a very important element, of course, for many of our people. The other aspects of these other multiple elements that are also engaged with are also important, and including, of course, the contribution to this emerging Maori economy. Because a big problem facing many of our iwi is how do we get the participation from our ordinary Maori hapu citizens to buy into the idea of a collective good, of the notion of economic development for the tribe as well as for individual hapu and so on. And while I don't pretend that we've got all the answers that solve the tension between individual need and the collective tribal need, even the Waitangi Tribunal hasn't been able to solve that tension. But we certainly in projects like this have the capacity to mediate that tension. And so I guess in summary, I know this is a bit of a long-winded introduction, but I just wanted to say that I wanted to commend the project to you all. Its potential is totally unfulfilled as it stands at the moment. In other words, I'm saying that we're just scratching the surface of what potentially is here in a project such as this. So I'm very passionate about supporting this project. I know that it works. I know that the values are correct at the baseline, and I know that because of its low cost element that's involved in getting involved with this, it enables everyone to participate. And that, I think, is the key to the enactment of all of these other interventions. That if people if they can't participate because it's too expensive and so on, then obviously we're not going to get the traction that we need. So to the extent that this is a project that has got a lot more potential to give, and that it's running on a shoestring, that it has got a proven track record now, and it's been going for some years now, and has a track record of success. It can point to research-based evidence for what it's been achieving. It's got international connectedness because this type of project around the bigger notion of food security is of international concern. And I've just come back from Alaska, where that project was also part of the discussion of the National Science Foundation, the biggest research organisation in the United States. It has certainly been part of the discussion that has been undertaken in places like Lesotho in the middle of Africa, where they have a minister appointed for food security. It's certainly an issue that's abroad in Canada, across the Pacific. The State Department of the US has openly stated that their interest in the Pacific region is around food security as their number one priority. So the international concern with food security, of course, is the rising populations across the world, and the corollary of that is a growing world food shortage. So the fact that we make that act of growing our own food, and that we learn and relearn some of our skills to enable this to occur, is in fact, I think, a protection and survival initiative for Maori for the future.
Te rasta, kia ora.